Good afternoon or morning, everyone, depending on where you're calling in from. I'm Lauren Garcia-Chance. I'm the Associate Director of Professional Development for the American Public Gardens Association, and we're really excited to welcome you to another IDEA Cafe. So without further ado, I'll hand the mic over to Maylin. Thank you, Maylin.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Hello, everyone. My name is Maylin Plummer. My pronouns are she, her. I am Director for the IDEA Center for Public Gardens. IDEA is Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility. It is so great to have you all here today. I'm really excited to help sponsor and facilitate today's IDEA Cafe on measuring IDEA in partnership with the association's IDEA Committee and the association. So thank you again, Lauren, and also the IDEA Cafe team. You all work with me and work together so beautifully to bring all these topics together. So we couldn't do this without you. So thanks again for all your help and wonderful support in making this happen. If you have joined us before, welcome back. If this is your first time joining, welcome, and we're so glad you are here. Our goal is to build a community of courageous conversations and create transformation, one conversation at a time. We hope today's topic will be a launching point for further discussion within your organizations or wherever you are. So there is a saying that what gets measured gets managed, but that can be challenging when it comes to IDEA, when our intentions include feelings of belonging and welcoming. So how do we know if we're making a difference? How do we know that our efforts are creating the outcomes we desire, and know when do we adjust or change course? I'm really excited to dive into this topic today with you all and with our panelists. So I'd like to introduce Elkin Alfred with Denver Zoo, Kavina Devereaux from Desert Botanic Garden, and Corinne Gibson from Phipps Conservatory. They will each share information about their roles, an overview of their organization's IDEA initiatives and goals. How do they approach measuring success, and what kind of tools and processes do they use? And how do they use those measurements? What are they used for? And after their individual presentations, I will further moderate questions and dive just a little bit deeper. And then lastly, we'll open it up for questions from you all, from the participants. So feel free to track your questions in the chat or use the Q&A function anytime. And if we don't address it through our conversations, we'll be sure we get to it at the end. I also want to welcome Kat Calloway, who's on the IDEA Committee, who will be supporting me in the chat and in the Q&A. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to our first presenter, which is going to be Kavina Devereaux from Desert Botanic Garden. Take it away, Kavina.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, wherever you're located. I am Kavina Devereaux. I am the Senior Director of Social Responsibility and Inclusion here at Desert Botanical Garden in Phoenix, Arizona. Just to provide a little bit of history about myself and just our journey as an organization. Our garden has been doing this work for about 14 plus years, but we really started doing it intentionally in 2019 when I was hired. We received a grant from IMLS for $250,000 to implement IDEA professional development program for IDEA in our organization. And I was hired through the HR through that. So I'm going to present a presentation about where we have been, where we are currently, and where we're going. Give you a little bit of background about where our numbers were before. Our organization was about 80% white at that time. We'll reference a lot of staff, even though that's not something that you have to focus on. But I started in the HR department, and then I eventually moved to a different department where I now have my own department. So you will hear me reference staff a lot in the beginning because I was under HR. Are you all able to see this? Okay, I can see you all nodding your head. That's a good thing. Give me one moment. So I really wanted to come in and really have a brand for our organization so people can recognize we're, as far as us as an organization, and that we support this. When it comes to diverse populations, they tend to look for organizations that have some things out there. So maybe they're looking at, your job description, the wording you have in there. They may be looking at your website. They may be looking at your leadership. who do you have in your leadership to kind of see if they will fit in that organization. So something I really wanted to come in to do was branding, right? So I wanted to brand that we are an organization that supports this work. So work with our marketing team to create our own little brand for our idea work. And then we have different things that we use, our staff wears to kind of promote this as well. So this is a commitment. So we don't call it our mission. We call it our D&I commitment because we are committed to this work. So this was created by our internal idea committee, and it was eventually approved by the personnel committee or you can kind of just review it. It's very long, so I'm not going to, read the entire thing, but we are committed to this work. So we do have this on our website. It is under our mission statement on our mission page, and it's also under our HR page where potential employees are able to see that we are committed to this work. So as far as the past, so something that we did as an organization when I was under the HR department is we conducted an organizational review of our policies and recruitment process. Like I said, when I first started, our organization was about 80% white and then, smaller numbers in other areas. So I looked at our numbers. We wanted to see how can we be more intentional with our recruitment. We did go and revamp all of our job descriptions. By revamping, I now review every job description that is for our organization. So if it's a new job description, if it's an old job description, I look at it for barriers. I look at it for barriers that might exclude people. So something that was really big when I first started was the educational barriers, right? So we were very education focused, requiring degrees in areas you don't require degrees in. So I remove an educational requirements. So I tend to ask my hiring managers, is it a want or a need? Is this needed to do the role? If it's not needed to do the role, I usually remove it. And then we also have our own little DEI idea statement on our job descriptions as well, basically welcoming all type of people to apply to our jobs. We also revised our recruitment process to intentionally recruit for diversity, skills, knowledge, and experience. So what does that mean? So we started partnering with external organizations that really focus on these demographics that we're trying to reach out to. We look at the gaps that we have in our organization. So as far as our strategic plan, we highlight 3 areas. We highlight millennials, we highlight Latinx, and we highlight families with young children. So we wanted to really recruit for those areas to so we can have the community see themselves within our organization. And it will be easier for us to do that by intentional recruiting. So like I said, we mutually partner with many organizations that work with diverse communities. And why I say it's mutually beneficial, because sometimes organizations do that and they only focus on entry-level positions. So I'm not letting them know about this entry-level position. I'm also letting them know about higher-level positions, CFOs. I'm letting them know about position. So it's not just, okay, we only think you could, have entry-level jobs. For us, you may have a larger network. So we have worked with a number of organizations to really increase our diversity in our role. As I stated, when I first started, I was under the HR department. So I reported to the HR director. I was just a manager at that time. So my title at the time, I always have long titles. My title at that time was a manager of workforce development and diversity. In 2021, my role was expanded to a senior level position. So now I have my own department. I'm no longer under HR. I'm under IDEA. That is our department name. And I'm only focusing on staff. I don't do that anymore. I'm focused on organizational idea work. So I collaborate. I'm more in the middle. I collaborate with each department. So I collaborate with our visitor-facing departments that handle programming. I collaborate with HR. I'm constantly collaborating with other departments. So I'm no longer just under one area with limited reach. I now have a larger reach where I can hit the entire organization, which I do. So I do collaborate on our programming. I do collaborate on our HR, like I said, but I also work with the board. So I sit on board committees and our one committee that I sit on, which is very important for our organization, is our nomination and governance committee, which actually recruits the board members coming into our organization. So this is where we are now. So as I stated, we started out as 80% white, smaller areas and smaller numbers in other areas. So we have grown. We still have work to do. So I'm not going to sit here and say we have accomplished a lot. These are the numbers I want to see. But we really focus on the Hispanic Latino community because that has been our strategic plan. And so legally, you can't request this information from staff. So your numbers will always be skewed, right? So these numbers most likely aren't correct. They could be higher or lower in certain areas. So we have focused on really a real mix in our generation as well, because, baby boomers are now retiring. So we are bringing in more Generation X as far as in leadership roles, millennials, and then Generation Z as well. So these are some things that we are doing presently. So before, we really wanted to focus on also diversifying our programming. So we have created programming for a variety of things: autism awareness, Hispanic Heritage Month, Pride Month, Juneteenth, Native American Heritage Month, Earth Day, Cesar Chavez Day, and Immigrant Heritage Month. And we have created programming for that. And I don't have all the pictures. Like I said, I'm really big on that branding aspect. So we like to have a brand for each of these months. So we have something called the KCOM Challenge, which is a Community Audience Engagement Challenge, where the garden is we have a goal to reach out to 10,000 new diverse audience members to come visit our garden. And my department is responsible for 5,000 of those numbers. So something that I did was a special partnership that I'm really proud of with the city of Phoenix is our Great Start program. So this program provided access to 2,000 families with pre-K children in the garden. Research shows when kids are introduced to cultural institutions earlier in the age, it kind of helps them throughout their time in school. So we also launched the Your Voice is Free webinar series. So a lot of gardens tend to sometimes have programming that costs. So the Your Voices series is actually a series that the IDEA department created, where we were using basically people of color, BIPOC people in the community, to kind of speak for themselves and speak on certain topics that affect their communities. We did increase our garden minimum wage. So we want to provide a living wage for our employees. We know the cost of living is constantly increasing. So we increased our minimum wage for our full-time, our regular status staff, which is our permanent staff, to $20 an hour and $15 for seasonals. And our executive committee just voted to recognize Juneteenth as a paid holiday for staff. That was actually earlier this year. So something that we have done as far as the board, so I'm talking about program, I'm talking about staff, but we also have done work internally for our board. So we have worked with the consultant to kind of help them realize what areas they want to grow, where the gaps were for the board. They all also attended a foundational IDEA training. So that's something that our staff did as well when I first started. We had 3 phases of training for 3 years. The first phase was foundational training. The second phase was generational training. Another phase was micro inequities in the workplace. Micro inequities could affect everybody. So we want to make sure we have basically a shared language. And so we have the board on the same area that we are. They have to also attend training to make sure they're able to speak the same language we're speaking as internally as an organization. So again, like I mentioned earlier, the Nomination and Governance Committee created avenues to connect with prospective trustees. And so we invite them to garden events, and we use garden committees as well to kind of create an avenue for them to get to know the garden, because sometimes people aren't really familiar with the garden. We want to kind of create that additional outreach to them so they can know us as an organization. And we also created a matrix/dashboard to identify those gaps that we see each year. So when we are recruiting for the next year, we know what we're doing. So something that we have done future-wise, we hired a diversity specialist and a temporary diversity coordinator. The diversity coordinator is a student worker for one of the local universities here. We are going to do a new board assessment. We have recently contracted with the consultant to do a full IDEA assessment on the garden and create a guide to help us create a strategic plan for just IDEA within the next few years. And we just started doing that work this month. And so we also want to utilize that guide to kind of create policy systems and events through an equity lens and really focus on that. Something that we're also going to do is revamp the IDEA professional development program that was created back in 2019 for trustees and the workforce and volunteers as well. And of course, create additional avenues to connect with potential diverse trustees. So I went over a lot of things. I know there's going to be questions about it, and I'm happy to answer them. But that's the work that we have done since 2019. And I'm just really mentioning a small part of it. We have done a lot of things to really reach out to the community. We are really focused on the community resembling how we look internally as an organization. We want everybody that comes to our garden to feel like they're welcome and they belong. So that's a big thing for me. So I'm mentioning numbers as far as staff. But I'm not talking about, I haven't talked about or mentioned, the attrition rate. How long are these employees staying? That's something important to me. Do they feel like once they're in our organization, they can belong in our organization? That's something that's also important to me. So we most likely will talk about that, in a couple minutes, but that's something that you should also look at as an organization. Don't focus on just the diversity of the numbers. Also focus on that inclusion part, that not just the diversity, but the inclusion part, the equity part. So that was the equity for us to increase our minimum wage. We want to make sure that people are being paid equitably as well in our organization. So we have done work, but we still got a lot to do. And I constantly tell my leadership that, like, we have done things, but there's still work to do.
Thank you so much, Kavina. That's excellent. And just want to let everyone know, yes, this is recorded, and typically we post it onto our YouTube channel within a week, and the association also will send out a link to the recording. But also I'll be collecting the PowerPoints or any slides from our participants today, and I will share it afterwards. There's a lot of really fantastic information. So with that, I'm going to now turn it to Elkin Alfred from the Denver Zoo. Elkin, go for it.
Hi, everyone. Let me try to get my slideshow working. All right, so hi, I'm Elkin Alfred. My pronouns are she, her. And for those who may be visually impaired, I'm a beautiful Black woman, and I'm wearing a Black dress with glasses. I'm the Director of Equity and Culture at Denver Zoo. So just a little bit background on me. I am a child of immigrants. Both of my parents are Haitian American. I say that because that's important to me, and it impacts how I navigate and how I view the world and how I do this work. My background has primarily been in the behavioral health space. So this is the first time I'm working in a cultural institution, which has been a learning journey in itself. But my background is primarily around behavioral health and health equity. And so I've taken some of those learnings into the work that I do here at the zoo. So I am going to quickly go over sort of our blueprint for equity. It is rooted in us practicing cultural humility, which is the idea that in order for us to do this work, we have to first start with ourselves and examining who we are and how we show up, and then being curious about the people around us and understanding the power systems that we exist in and how they impact this idea of belonging and inclusivity. So we tell a lot of stories at Denver Zoo because we're always trying to tell the stories of the animals in our care. And so one of the things that we wanted to focus on is, well, how do we tell the story of our staff and our volunteers? And so in order for us to really do that, we have to be in conversation and relationship with the zoo. So our CEO is Bert Vescalani. He's very supportive of this work. I was brought to the zoo in 2021 at the recommendation of our staff. The D&I committee at the zoo at the time recommended that we need a full-time role. And then I came along. I sit in the HR function currently. And then I have a learning and belonging manager, a people manager, and they have a volunteer coordinator and then a training and development coordinator. So this is sort of our team. Again, we are doing this work with the idea of practicing cultural humility. So it's a personal and lifelong commitment to self-evaluation and self-critique, where we not only learn about our own culture, someone else's culture, but we start with our own and understanding power dynamics and imbalances. And we encourage each other to advocate for one another. Before I get into the meat of this, I wanted to share this quote, and I'm probably going to read it. It's not my words, and I wish I can remember who I got this from, but it resonated with me because I think I want to be honest about this work is very emotionally draining. And when you're doing this work, there are moments where you're angry, and valid anger, right? I'm not telling anyone to tamper their anger, but I approach this work and I tell staff and tell leadership that the fire uncontained destroys everything and everyone, its source included. It is literally that simple, meaning I am going to encourage everyone here to do the work of taking care of yourself first when you're doing this work, and making sure that your anger doesn't use you, but you use your anger in however way you see fit. So as someone who's practicing behavioral health, it was important for me to start off with that, acknowledging how this work can be emotionally taxing. So when we were doing this work, we got staff together. We called them the Blueprint Group. It was staff across all levels, across departments, guest facing, planning, HR, our conservation team. And they all wanted to know, well, what is the role of the individual? Like, maybe I don't have this job title, but how can I help co-create the culture that we want? And so we got this from creative leadership. If they're a great resource I go to for leadership development. And so these are some of the principles that we share with staff on how they can help create this very inclusive environment. So I won't read all of this, but I'll just highlight is deepen self-awareness, foster, reveal gaps in understanding, listen to understand. And we tell staff all the time, how can you don't show up to prove, but show up to listen, create connections. And we're intentionally designing opportunities to create connections, whether that is through our employee resource groups or our learning communities. Like we like to refer to them as communities of practice. So we have a book club where staff meets, and for 4 months we read and discuss a book. It could be a book really focused on inclusivity, a book really focused on inclusion. I think the next book we're probably going to read that I recommend is Move Fast and Fix Things. It's a really good book that talks about trust and authenticity and logic, and it's really meaningful to the work that we're doing now. So this is our D&I culture commitment. This was created and co-designed with staff and volunteers. So at Denver Zoo, we understand that our mission to save wildlife for future generations is dependent on our ability to hire and train diverse staff and volunteer talent. We are co-inspired to co-create a workplace that would not only recognize and celebrate our differences, but is designed with those differences in mind. We are committed to creating a sense of belonging that allows for all to thrive. So what does that mean? That means that from even our website and when we're recruiting, during our onboarding process for both staff and volunteers, we're thinking about their multiple identities. So they're through a lens of intersectionality, how can we create processes that really help us to become more equitable? And so an example I can share with you right now, our volunteer base, it is very white and made up of primarily boomers. And so we're trying to figure out what can we do to really increase the diversity of our volunteer pool. So this year we made a decision to remove, we had a requirement in order for you to be a volunteer, you have to have a paid membership. So we removed that barrier, and we're in the process of actually having a belonging liaison. So this volunteer is their primary role will be to help create an inclusive environment and then also work with community partners to help diversify our volunteer base. And when I say diversify, I always center our work on race, but it doesn't end there. Meaning I'm looking at gender, sexual orientation, neurodiversity. So we're looking at all of those things in our work. I'm not going to go through all of this, but these are some of the tactics that we've identified that we're going to work not only in HR, but with our partners across the organization. So then we can meet this goal or meet our culture commitment that we made. So I'll skip through this. This is very quick. Maylin, if you need me to send this to you, I can send this to you if folks are interested. But I'm not going to read all of this. It's a lot. But what I would like to say is that our tactics are focused around the experience of our volunteers and staff, our communication, like how are we communicating information, and leadership development. So how can we make sure that our leaders are really practicing inclusive leadership? As a result of this work, we started a leadership development program called Relationship-Based Management. And the idea is that if we're going to change systems of inequity, we have to really focus on relationships that we have with each other. And so our people leaders will go through a series of 7 modules focused on different aspects of how we can create a more inclusive environment. So the first one I did was around healthy habits. So we focused on wellness and well-being. We also focus on the principles of inclusive leadership. And then the second module is around how do we mitigate bias in the hiring process. And then the third one that we're launching now, this series, is around how do you cultivate one-to-one meetings that really have purpose and help support our mission of being more inclusive. So how will we measure success? So results-based accountability is a framework that is from Mark Friedman, and it answers or asks 3 essential questions. How much did we do? How well did we do it? And are we better off? How much did we do is very simple. The number of activities. So how often are ERG groups meeting? What type of events are they having? Who's participating? Are we, because we're a large campus, we have wired staff, unwired staff. So are we creating opportunities for all types of staff to engage in our work and our learning? How well did we do it? Simple. Are people satisfied, right? Are they leaving feeling happy? Are they leaving the space feeling like they were included? That could mean, are we thinking about the snacks that we have? Are we thinking about people's dietary restrictions? Are we giving staff who maybe need a little bit more time to process? Are we allowing space for that? Are we making sure that as leaders, the assumptions that we have around how people show up is not based on neurotypical behavior, and that we're doing it thinking about just the diversity of how our brains are wired? And then are we better off? Is our staff reporting, and are we seeing new skills? Are they being more inclusive? Are they thinking about who are they inviting when they're making big decisions? Attitudes, do they feel safer? Do they feel like they're belonging? And some of that we measure, whether it's through pulse surveys or employee engagement surveys, but we don't only focus on quantitative data, we look at qualitative data. So we also are intentional about having listening sessions. And so right now, one of the things that I'm doing is I'm meeting with staff one-to-one across the zoo and sharing 3 things with them: our D&I philosophy, how we're doing this work. I'm also giving them an opportunity to tell me about their experience and how they would like to be engaged in this work. And then I'm also talking to them about our systems. So right now we're doing systems analysis work. So we're looking at the systems that help prompt the behaviors that we want. So systems that we're looking at is changing our EPC process, our employee performance cycle process, to make sure we mitigate bias in that process. We're also looking at our inclusive decision-making process. We're looking at our overall structure, and we're looking at how can we support staff, because we work with animals, and when they die, it impacts staff a lot. So what are the systems we have in place to help with grief? And then again, just self-reporting and behavior change. And then I think the last piece we're probably going to launch in 2024 is a 360 feedback, right? So staff can really share like what their experiences are as it relates to psychological safety. So I think that is it I wanted to share on my end, and then I'll just wait for questions.
Thank you so much, Elkin. Such a depth of information. So again, to all, I will be sharing any slides or PowerPoints after the cafe so that you all have this in your hands. And we'll share resources through the IDEA Forum, which you can access through the association's website and the community section. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to hand it now to Corinne Gibson from Phipps Conservatory. Take it away, Corinne.
Good afternoon to some and good morning to others. I'm Corinne Gibson, the Director for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Community Engagement here at Phipps Conservatory and Botanical Garden. Like my fellow panelists, I've been in this role a little less than 2 years. And so our building of our DEI exposure and how we're moving forward in our journey is quite different. My background is a bit different as well, not from a nonprofit, but came from higher education for over 15 years, working in inclusive excellence and multicultural development. And in that, really took an opportunity to build systems that created holistic academic and social integration for underrepresented students. And so utilizing that same type of skill set here in a nonprofit is what we're doing here at Phipps. And so right before I came in 2022, there was a staff survey that was conducted that asked about workplace culture and diversity. And from that was pretty much a baseline as to what needed to be done, as many were doing during that time of 2020 after the murder of George Floyd. This was part of the initial intentional beginning of doing IDEA at Phipps Conservatory. And so with that information, it clearly stated to them that they needed someone that would lead this process. And so I was brought on as a director of the DI and community engagement, which was specifically made that title because it incorporates both the internal and external needs around integrating DEA, both within the organization and in our relationship within the community. And so as an inaugural person to that position, I've been able to create what we're doing here at Phipps, and very excited to be able to first learn the culture. And if you're familiar with Phipps Conservatory, you recognize that we are very big in sustainability and climate change. And in that, I learned a whole lot around how that relates to what we do within IDEA, and look to it to create a regenerative lens of IDEA. From my own experiences within traditional trainings and whatnot that I have been part of and actually presented, I realize they fall very flat oftentimes, and they do not really create the change that we're looking to have. And so this was a great opportunity to try something brand new with the group that hadn't done this before. And so with that, we started with our inaugural regenerative DEI, is what we're calling it this time. And so I'm going to share just a small piece of that and what that looks like for us. But yeah, in that we're looking at that our mission is to create a culture of belonging that cultivates a diverse, equitable, and inclusive climate for all our stakeholders. So because I am not based in HR and didn't start in HR, I began in the beginning of being able to do this work in a collaborative effort that adds value to all of the departments. And so in that was very helpful in creating the commitment for the entire organization, which includes our board as well, that we are going to be committed to developing an exemplary culture of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility that's evidenced through our offerings and through all of our stakeholders. And so that was very fortunate for me that we also came right at the time we're starting to reamp our new strategic plan as well, and our vision. And so I was able to be a part of that conversation, as well as we'll start in 2024 with that. And in that, we utilized the time to integrate IDEA throughout all of the departments and all of our offerings. And in doing that, we looked first at the reflection of ourselves through our staff. And so I spend most of my time in regards to IDEA working on the internal piece of our for the staff. So it's one thing to recruit a lovely, diverse group of people, racially and also underserved people. However, we want them to be retained, and so we need to create a space that they will feel welcomed. And so in that, we are working with our staff on, we call them sessions, reflection sessions, because it's continuance. And in that continuance, here's what we're looking to do. So our framework is to look at the motivation of why we do what we do as an individual, and even in your core values as a person. Individually and collectively, how do we bring forward the issues that we all know and have around various diversity, equity, and inclusion concerns? And then the process is where I create a space in which we're able to dismantle a lot of the ongoing consciousness for this work. And that's really where you get into the, how we actually show up when we're doing it. So our concept is more around, if we change the way in which we ourselves interact with each other, that will be reflective in the work that we do and motivate us in acknowledging that as we uplift ourselves as well as our stakeholders. So that is a little bit about our regenerative DEI process. And when it comes to measuring that, we measure it twofold. And of course, there's always ways in which we look at it in regards to numbering and numbers, the quantitative piece of it. And so connecting with our community and underserved community outside of the organization is one way in which we do that. But we also develop and nurture existing partnerships that create those authentic relationships. I'd rather have 5 authentic relationships as opposed to just numbering. These are ways in which we connect with underserved communities. And so that was a bit of a change for the organization as well, that we were able to begin to look at things a bit differently as opposed to just quantitatively, and how many staff members of color or how many organizations are we connecting with that are helping and serving underserved groups. Those are some of the initial ways, but now we're looking to be a lot more intentional in the way in which our rapport and reputation around, just as we are with sustainability, we want to be known as a renowned IDEA organization as well. And so when we think about ways in which we measure that, we of course utilize our satisfaction surveys as well as our staff surveys. But the biggest piece that I've been able to initiate so far is having our performance reviews. Within that, there's a question of each of our staff and how the IDEA reflection sessions that we have quarterly and we have open ones monthly it's more optional. How are they affecting the work in which they're doing as well as their own personal lives? And so that information is coming in as we speak. Our fiscal year ended in September. And so we're starting to get that information in now. But yeah, that's our biggest way to know the impact in regards to belonging. If you're really looking to see, measure in that more qualitative piece, that's where we measure that. So thank you very much for your time. And I'll turn it back over to Maylin.
Thank you so much, Corinne. I appreciate you all so much. And, what I've really been observing and listening to how you all are sharing the journeys from within your organization and your roles and how you are experiencing it. So there's just some themes that I just kind of wanted to surface. I think that so much of this comes from your individual experiences, right? Your backgrounds, your lived experience. It also affects your lens and how you approach this personally and professionally. The other themes that I picked up are, things like change from the inside out, our own implicit bias. You're looking also internally within your organizations versus always kind of starting from the outside, like the number of visitors and your demographics. So you're starting from within. The other thing that I thought was really interesting is just that intentional creating of space, whether it's for reflection or how are you all feeling coping with grief or how are you dealing with things, like just creating that space. And I think, Kavina, for you, it's like, we're our own department. We're literally going to take up space and you have it in your branding. I think that's brilliant. The other thing is each of you have it really incorporated and approached your IDEA work within the kind of context and relevance of your missions. So, Corinne, I think that's what really stands out is I think many people know that Phipps Conservatory and your positioning in and championing of sustainability and climate change and looking at everything from a regenerative lens. I love how that is also translating into, the work that you're doing in IDEA. It's that regenerative approach. So I think that people can identify with that within your organizational identity. It's the same thing I think I'm hearing from Desert as well as the Denver Zoo, right? You're looking at the identity of your organization and your context within your community. So I think that those are really important. And then, lastly, you all have specific positions. These were created roles within your institution to put focus on this. So I want to call that out. But I also want to say that that's not always what's going to work for everybody, right? And for Botanic Gardens, we have a decentralized approach and ownership sits within all of our departments and in our strategy. So and we do have specific roles that are engaged in outreach and community. So I don't want to say that we don't have a dedicated role. It's just slightly decentralized. So I want to call that out because I think it's important to know that there's not just one way to do this. So now I'm going to kind of address take a deeper dive into some kind of questions. And I so appreciate folks putting some of their questions in the chat and the Q&A, but I'm going to start us off with a few things that kind of I observe. And so when it comes to, measuring impact, I think that's something that people feel often, right? We're looking for impact. So there's this tension between effort and impact. And I think what we've talked about is there's a lot of effort that kind of goes in. Those are your more immediate type of steps, right? Those are the things that may be more tangible. And where I feel like there's a lot of folks are saying, we're not doing enough. We need to do more. And then there's the other side of this, which is impact. What we're all trying to see is the difference being made, but that's a different time frame. So I kind of wanted to explore that and how you How do you approach that? How do you look at that long-term impact? How do you measure that? And what are ways that you're doing that versus the effort that you're putting in? And I'll let any of you just raise your hand or jump right in.
Oh, so thanks for the question. It's a good question. And I'm going to be honest, I think it is an ongoing reflection question for us, meaning our effort matters, right? You show people that they matter by the effort you put. And so whether that is resources, a position, training staff, all staff, so you don't have to have one person designated to lead this work. But effort only matters if it's really impacting folks. So staff oftentimes will ask for, we want more training, we want more training. And I say yes, and what research has shown us that training doesn't change behavior. Just D&I trainings are not enough. So if we want real impact, what are the systems that we have in place that we're redesigning to then prompt the behavior changes that we want? So I think effort matters. So I tell staff, yes, we're going to do training because we want common language. But if the impact is to change how people are experiencing the zoo, meaning our guests and our staff and our volunteers, then we have to focus on what is really going to drive the behavioral changes that we want. So that's how I look at it. I don't think you can have impact without effort, but effort alone does not give you impact.
Well said.
Absolutely. And I'll just continue with that conversation a little bit. As Elkin said, the impact is where most people are looking. They're looking for the results right away. And we often know that when you're looking to do a behavioral change, those things do not come very quickly always, especially when you're looking to change a whole organization's way of being. And so recognizing that those efforts, though, sometimes you have to start with low-hanging fruit, I call it, things that you're able to start with doing right away. And that may be just in, as an example, as for us, we just started tabling at spaces where we hadn't been before, that are all around us in underserved communities, but we just weren't there. And there was no reason why we weren't there, but we weren't there. And so just making those initial connections with people that were very familiar with Phipps, but just never saw us out in the community. How do we just start making those relationships? That was something I saw as low-hanging fruit. They're already there. We're already here. Let's just come together. But then when you're looking at how is this impacting, definitely from the inside out, I'm so adamant about not calling them sessions or trainings because exactly what you said, Elkin. That's not how change begins. And so we really look at the person. Each person takes their own journey and they're responsible for your own growth of capacity around DEI, and we provide the space for you to do that. We give you ideas around what it could be, how you could reach. For example, we did one on allyship, looking at it. Usually people choose a group or choose a cause, but how would it look if we all were championing each other in all our capacities and everywhere, in every place person that we come in contact? How would that look? How would that be different in regards to allyship? So providing space for that kind of capacity to be grown is really been shown profitable anecdotally so far through the performance reviews that I've read, how people are starting to take that initiative personally as they're creating their own goals and strategies within each department. And so then they're able to relay back to me if they have any questions, concerns, ways in which they're looking to add that value for the impact within their each individual departments, so that all our offerings are showing ways in which DEI can be integrated.
For us, I agree with Elkin and Corinne, but I will say for us, it's very similar to what Corinne said, those small things and building on it. And for me, the impact really has been for us, as I stated in my presentation, for us to have a shared language. Because it's not only in me to be able to have touch points with every department, because it's not only me now doing the work. I'm seeing an impact where where we are really ingraining idea within our organizational culture. So for instance, I had a director reach out to me, and I have people reach out to me all the time when they're creating programming. They're kind of bouncing things off me. Like, I'm not sure if it's performative or not, if it's really intentional, it's coming across authentic. So it's letting me know this work is having an impact on other departments. It's not just us teaching them and, trying to move them along on this journey. They're actually taking it in. And that's where I see the impact, because now decisions are being made where ideas in the forefront, and they're questioning themselves to make sure that when they are creating things for our organization or for the public, for our visitors, that they are doing it in an authentic way. And that's the impact on my end.
Excellent. And so thoughtful as well. Thank you all for your answers. I'm going to kind of branch off of that kind of question as well, kind of talk about, because I think we were talking about here behaviors and authenticity. And I think that people ask those kinds of questions a lot, like, what is authentic? I think idea work, as you all have pointed to, it relies a lot on attitudes and behaviors that, around empathy, forgiveness, grace, building trust, civility. So how do you approach that, I think, within your organizations? Or is there like a change there? Or how do you that's a loaded question. I'm so sorry. Like, Elkin, I didn't mean to make you panic. But it's big, right? Like, I think that's it, is if we're looking for authentic contribution and accountability, like there's a behavior element to that. So how do you change behavior? How do you approach that?
I think it starts with vulnerability. Like, you can't do any of that without vulnerability. And so I was sharing with leadership here around, because we have challenges that we're currently going through as an organization. And so I gave this analogy that, like, when you're doing this work, it's like you're spring cleaning. And when you're spring cleaning your house, you find spots that you haven't touched in a while, and you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize this was so dirty. And you're like, oh, you're a little embarrassed. And so we're going through that phase or that spot where we're like noticing things, and it is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. And so I think you have to first say that this is uncomfortable and it's okay, and give people time to sit in that. And then I just left the inclusion conference last week in Savannah, and the things that they talked about, exactly what you said, Malin, which is how do we create more space for empathy and then compassion. And I like to say compassion is empathy in action, right? And so that's what compassion calls us to do. And then civil discourse. This is not tone policing, so I want to be clear about that. Civil discourse, at least for us, I'm not saying tone police or sad. What I am saying is, how can we create space for the grace for people to learn and understand that people are in different spots in their learning journey? So I don't know if I have an answer for you outside of creating space to really openly talk about vulnerability, openly talk about when people feel harm and acknowledging that harm, and then taking steps, compassionate steps, to address the harm that was done. And then I like to tell folks, if you feel like you've done all your learning, then this is not the place for you. But if you feel like you want to continue to learn and grow, then stay here. But if you feel like you've arrived, then Denver Zoo is not the place for you. Find somewhere else that's going to challenge you to continue to grow and learn.
Well said, Elkin. There's a little bit of disruption in your audio, just want to let you know, but I think it was coming through. But I think that you really are pointing to the necessity for that space. And, we can't have creativity and innovation without fear, and actually going beyond that fear, right? I heard that somewhere recently in my reading, and I thought it was brilliant. I think it's true. I think fear holds so many people back, whether it's how we look, how we feel, shame has a part of that, but you can't actually address that without the vulnerability of stepping in and saying, this is really uncomfortable for me, or I just don't know how to say this, or I don't know what to do. There's a lot of power in being able to say, I don't know. And everybody else around being able to just stay open and hold that there, right? And support that person. I think that there's some skills there too. I think, Elkin, that you and I have talked about. There's, and I think all of us have talked about this. I don't think people realize that there's a large skill area around how to disagree, how to give and receive feedback. If there is something that you can do, it is spend some time exploring how to disagree and things to say that hold space so that people aren't feeling, right now is the term, attacked or canceled. We really have to get to the other side of that, right? Corinne and Kavina, did you want to add anything about changing behaviors and attitudes?
Yeah, I agree with what you've just said. And what just struck me, someone asked a question around our background in getting into this role. And I think that relates a lot to what you just said, Malin. Most of my background, well, my original degree was in public health. But it was in community health education. And so everything connects, you know, and in that community health education, it was always around how do you connect with people, and exactly what Malin said, how do you provide feedback and also be able to take feedback, and also showing people the authentic side of you does take the vulnerable, have to be, you know, present yourself a bit vulnerable, but also in a space where today you're talking about, yeah, you know, being canceled, or people are so nervous about saying the wrong thing, or making a mistake. It makes it so it makes it less welcoming for even trying to become authentic with each other. So I think for us, we've created these open sessions where I'm really just there chatting. You know, I love to chat, so it's already a thing that I enjoy doing. But, you know, I think when you realize that there's a mutual understanding, and you start to open up and share a bit about yourself, that helps others to share as well. And so I have done that here. And those that were very accepting of that, we've been able to build a lot of relationships. And that is a trickle effect. As others see you being authentic with someone else, then they feel that they can be authentic with you as well. So it's definitely a domino effect when you started rolling, but somebody's got to break the ice, and that's usually the role of this, you know, of the DEI person or IDEA.
Thank you, Corinne.
Good, Maylin.
Excellent. So my final question before I start going to the chat questions and Q&A questions is a question that I've received in the past, and I'm pretty sure that you all have as well, especially when it comes from I think I've heard this more from senior or executive leadership side, which is, well, don't we need to have data and hardcore metrics and also ROI? What is our ROI on this? Because, you know, we have to be able to justify this. What is it that you feel about, or how do you perceive, you know, ROI and the relevance of that? And ROI meaning return on investment for folks who may not be familiar with the acronym, right? It's a very common incentive in the business world that what we do has to have some kind of return on investment. And that could be in different ways, right? It could be monetary, it could be otherwise, but that tends to lean towards the more quantitative data when we kind of look at idea work. So yeah, do you measure ROI, and or what does that play, if any at all, in the work that you do?
So we measure it to an extent. So when we create diverse programming, we aren't putting a lot of pressure on ourselves. We know we are starting out to do that work right now. So we're hoping to build our audience that way. And we're looking at the consistency of our numbers with this programming. So we are looking at it to see if we are, you know, we're investing in working with other community partners and paying them for their services. We're not just doing the work ourselves. We are allowing them to have a seat at the table as well. That's how we're trying to do these things authentically, because I'm not an expert in every race. I'm not an expert in every culture. I'm not an expert in all this. I'm still learning myself. So we do allow others to come and work directly with us to kind of create our programming as well. And so we are looking at the investment to see if we are actually reaching out to these communities and how it's doing as far as numbers. So for instance, we had a very large Juneteenth event earlier this year. And last year was much smaller, but this year we went all out. It was a week-long activities that we had throughout our garden. And just to see the numbers from last year to this year on the same date, we knew as far as what we invested in our marketing, we knew what we invested as far as working with these community partners and paying them for their services, we definitely received the ROI. And we're going to do things bigger and better next year. And even when it comes to our staffing, right, we are investing additional funding into reaching out to more diverse job websites, and then just other community organizations. Like I said, as far as having those numbers, increase in numbers in our staff, we see it is making a difference. So we are somewhat looking on ROI, but I'm saying the focus is not that, because we know there are things that you have to do to eventually build on to doing real impactful work within your organization.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Kavina. And as I said, this role for me is a little less than 2 years. And so when I think about the ROI of it, I just look about what is the investment that we're looking to receive? What are we looking to do? And so thankfully, in my role, I do report directly to the president CEO, and was able to have that conversation is what are we looking to achieve? Why am I here? And what is expectations that we have for my role? Yes, I recognize that I'm putting in the details of that, but the overall where is the buck line? Where's the line end? And for us, it was more around how do we recognize that we needed to make a change in our diversity around our guests, around our staffing, and around our offerings in general. And so in doing that, we recognized that would bring in the monetary investment that we were looking to have. Just last summer, we had our Flowers Meets Fashion inspired by Billy Porter. First time in which this kind of exhibit was ever done at 130-year Botanical Garden in Western Pennsylvania. And we saw great revenues of that, not just in monetary ways, but also in the number of different racial diversity and transgender. And there was some of everyone that had never been to the garden before that came this summer. And so now the job is to keep that kind of momentum going. How do we continue to provide those same kind of integrated offerings throughout all of the things in which we do here at Phipps? So it's all in what you're looking to measure, when it comes to ROI. And if you're looking to measure your impact in the community around you, then that's how you would look to see what is the result of that. If it's all about dollars and cents, you're probably going to have to wait a little bit longer to see an ROI when it comes to IDEA. That's just my opinion.
I'm sometimes annoyed by this question because we never have to explain why we value innovation, integrity, or resilience. So why are we treating DEIA or IDEA differently? So I see that this is our value system that helps us meet our mission. And it's a requirement for us to meet our mission. So yes, it matters. Yes, I know it's important for us to have the resources we need. I get all of that. But in this space, I'm annoyed by that question because we don't really ask that question when we talk about other parts of our business. We just automatically know we do them because they matter. We don't ask the innovation team to prove why you need to be here, why we need this department. So yes, I'm always irritated by that question.
But also to those people's defense, okay, just a little bit, is that it's new. And so anything new, people are always going to ask questions of, well, why are we doing this? What's the point? So I do give them a little grace on that respect when it comes to asking about the ROI. And that was really part of my first year here at Phipps, as I said, as an inaugural position and not in HR. I really had to take my time and let people know exactly why I was there and why it did matter. I think now they get it, but when I first came, yeah, it was a lot of, so what do you do for real? Like, I'm not really sure. So, and I just, I took that with a grain of salt, recognizing that it wasn't a position, but now they should be able to quote my own commitment statement to other people.
Yeah, I think that I get annoyed as well sometimes, but I think part of it is because it hits something just in my own behavior. Sometimes I can be very transactional, right? I came from a corporate banking background, right? I was in the for-profit world. Everything was about a transaction, a deliverable. And so while I think ROI is a great place sometimes to start a conversation, it is not where you end.
That's it, Maitland. Yeah, and I find sometimes people want to end it there, and I'm like, we can't end our conversation there.
Yeah, I think because if we value numbers, transactions, and even value on dollars or numbers, we're really doing a disservice to the relevance of people's emotions and humanity. And we do need to recognize that and create space for it. Kavina?
I was just thinking, because I agree with you all, but at the same time, you do have to look at the numbers, right? For any of our gardens to be sustainable, we have to continue to reach out to other audiences. And that's why it's really important right now. And if you don't have those numbers coming in, then you are not going to be sustainable in the future. So I get what you are saying. We should not have to, and then you have to kind of also question, what is the reason you're doing this work too? That's when it comes to that conversation with the CEO, with the executive director. Are you only looking for numbers? Because that's another conversation. But I get it. You do have to see those results, because for us to continue to be sustainable, we have to reach out to other audiences. Otherwise, we will not be. Generations are right now dying off, especially when it comes to donors. People who have donated to gardens for a long time are getting older and they aren't donating as much. So we have to reach out to other audiences to continue to be sustainable. So I get the numbers part, but then you also have to kind of question, like, why are you really doing this work? So
I think Deanna in the chat said it so much better than I could have said it, but she says, yes, and thinking deeply about what counts as return. So feelings of belonging from our members or communities equals return. So how are we defining returns? Can it be an and? Can we talk about financial returns and belonging as a return? I think that's where I sometimes get frustrated. So if our conversation is around return, is financial reward and the sense of belonging and community, then I'm all in on talking about ROI. Thanks, Dan. I think it's Dana. That resonated with me. So I'm going to be stealing that. Just wanted to let you know, but I'll quote you.
Excellent. So I'm going to turn to, thank you for that and your honesty, y'all. Like, I think we have to acknowledge sometimes where we also have some of our own personal feelings in this, because really trying to separate personal from professional, I have yet to be able to accomplish that. And honestly, I don't think I want to. That's why I'm in the work that I'm doing. Well, so there's been a few different questions, and I get this a lot. The center, right, in the cohort program is the role of training, especially I've heard a lot of consistency around docents and volunteers. And so I think what I'm hearing is that, whenever something goes wrong, for example, maybe there's a certain interaction between either a volunteer and a guest or an employee or other between employees. The first thing that happens is, we need training. We need to teach people what to say and what not to say. And you know what? I think fluency is very important, right? Because I think that does attribute to our sense of confidence and our, comfort level. But also, I think that we can't just put 100% on that feeling of comfort, because what we talked about before is this whole fear component. So I kind of want to hear from each of you, like, how do you approach? Is there training, quote training, right? Or how are you building awareness on kind of, I guess, bringing to the surface implicit bias? I think that's ultimately at the heart of this question. We can't fix something we don't know about, right? So how do you approach that? Is it internal? Is it external? You bring people in, just curious.
I'll go first. I probably have the least time to actually have experienced it, but my background is in multicultural development as well with my master's degree. I didn't get to that part, but so the conversation that I usually have when it comes to volunteers and docents is really what I say with all the departments. It's where I add value to what they already know. So I'm not there to quote unquote give them a training on, interacting with people. They've been doing that. Most times our docents and volunteers have been successful in whatever workplace and now, are retired and wanting to connect with people still. So I'm not looking to, start fresh with that. I'm usually looking to help them to understand better ways in which to respond to questions in which they're perhaps asked, and giving them different viewpoints in which to respond. And so as you probably would expect with the show, with the Billy Porter inspired show, there came lots of different conversations and visitors that were maybe not as happy with the exhibit, although it was well done. I mean, honestly, if anyone had anything you had to see it, you'd really probably be like, oh, really, is this Billy Porter? I didn't know, because it was very understated in that regard. But yet there were some that were unhappy with that. So what we did is provide added notes for the docents, for their docent notes, in ways in which they could de-escalate any conversations around why are you doing this and what is this about. And it really just, I again use the regenerative lens in giving them answers to say, here's where we are in the business of showing and exhibiting all forms of beauty in nature. And here's where this is what this show is doing. Something really easy that they could remember and didn't have to, try to get into the semantics of, any DEI dealings or what have you, but just something that they could be able to feel confident and yet say it with a smile, and something that they believed, that we are here to share the beauty of nature and in all its forms and fashions. And that's what you're seeing. So yeah, not a formal training in regards to that. I really feel like you have, again, I use the word authentic a lot, but I feel like if it's not coming from your inner person, then you're just a parrot. And quite frankly, if you don't have anything good to say, maybe you should just not be in that place of business. And if that's something that you're unable to share in a nice, peaceful way. So that's my thoughts about it.
So we are an organization that has had training. Like I said, when I first started out in 2019, we created professional development programs. So we do training just so we can have a shared language. And that means, this was new for our organization. So we needed our employees to understand the changes that were going to come to our organization that will affect them. And, like I said, we talked about micro inequities and generations in the workplace. People tend to think when it comes to this work, it's only racial. We're not only talking about racism and things of that nature. We're talking about, biases in hiring. That could be a bias regarding social economic bias and not looking at transferable skills. We're doing trainings about those things as well for people to be aware that, no, you do not have to have a background in museums or cultural institutions to sometimes do this work. So we are training our staff on that. We are providing them with the tools they need to do this. They may not understand it's actually ideal work we're doing. And that's the way that's the way I present our trainings, right? I have them think about it from an empathy way. So for instance, like I said, people tend to think this is more dealing with race, ideal work, but it's not. So I've done a presentation where I've sat everyone down. I had them close their eyes, and I had to think about a time where they were the only in the room before. So that could be the only woman in the room. It could be the youngest or the oldest of that age. And everybody has felt that at one point. They may be the oldest person in the room, right? Because some demographics deal with that glass ceiling. So say you're the oldest in the room and you're in a room full of millennials. What does that feel like? You didn't like the way it felt, right? You didn't like the way that you may have felt like you have to do extra if you were the only woman in the room, or if this is not an attack on anybody. And that's why I kind of come from with our training. It's not attacking you as a person. It's more having that awareness of what others might be going through and how can we really change, like we talked about, the behavior. And when we're presenting ourselves in the work environment, I tell people all the time, my job is not to sway you one way or the other. But this is something that we're investing in as an organization. And this is something that we believe in as an organization. And if you don't like it, this is not the organization for you. That's where I'm coming at with our training. It's the empathy part. It's not to change anyone or their thoughts, their feelings. We all have our own cultures. We all have our own experiences. We all have our own worldviews. But it's coming more from a respect, awareness, and understanding from our training side of things.
Yeah, the only thing I'm going to, and specifically for volunteers, for those who are mentors or docents, they go through a culture of equity workshop. And again, to Kavina's point, it's really centered on shared language. And then I also facilitate a welcoming workshop, which has intersectional activity that walks you through the multiple identities we all hold. And to Kavina's point, not just race, but our faith, socioeconomic status, our ethnicity. And that I find that really resonates with volunteers because then they start to do that introspection work. And then I also say, I'm not here to change anyone's beliefs, but I am here to tell you that these are our values. So our values of being welcoming to everyone, if that does not resonate with you, if you can't do that, then this is not the place for you. But I'm not here to change your beliefs. I don't really care about your own personal beliefs. I just care about how are you showing up and treating people. And so I always make the distinction between beliefs and values. And so we're here focused on beliefs. I'm sorry, values.
Well said. This is the approach we also take through the cohort program, understanding our individual identities and how they play out in organizational identity as well as community identity, right? We have to kind of understand how these kinds of things influence our day-to-day behavior, but we have to understand also when you're going into an organization that has certain values, right, and has a mission, like then it's about understanding, is this something you can compromise on? And if it doesn't, then this may not be the right place for you. So I think that that's an important thing to really understand and why we talk about identity so often, because it does influence how we show up in the workplace and in our communities. So the other question I'm going to get to, because I think I get this a lot, and I saw this in the chat or Q&A, I'm going to present it in a different way. It's about accountability. I'm going to ask the question, how do you institutionalize accountability? And so it's not just top down, right? I think a lot of times we look at it from, well, if our leadership isn't, then why should I? That's a valid question. But also, we really do, I think, as organizations who are trying to be places for all people, how do you create accountability across an institution, across all those levels?
As I said earlier, like we're in the midst of doing our strategic plan, the next 5-year strategic plan, and this was just ideal for me, being able to create and build in that accountability throughout all of our offerings. And so that is one way in which you could just bake it in, as part of what is expected from each department, and then that would be the responsibility of that director or manager to ensure that the work that is being done is in the context of integrating IDEA. And so that's the way in which we're moving forward with it. And that would be also a way in which for us to measure it. But also accountability often comes in that indirect, in that unseen space, where, we're looking to affect cultural change of the organization. And the more in which you're able to do that, just from the way in which you are interacting with each other, I think that's another way of accountability. Here at Phipps, if you've ever worked here, you know that we definitely walk the walk when it comes to sustainability. You won't find a plastic anything here. You will find, we utilize, all of the, when you look at the SDGs, all of those, we put that in and bake it in. And as the person that was not from a culture that was doing that, when I came, it was like, where's your water bottle, girl? You need your water bottle. Like, sustainable one. Like, this is what we do here. And, so I really think it just becomes part of the culture. And that's the way, it wasn't said in a negative way to me, but it was really just to let me know that this is the way our culture is. And so that accountability can be, that specifics, what that's written, and the unwritten is really what I would say.
I think we are still trying to figure that out. I will be honest. I think we're trying to figure out what are our ecosystems of accountability. So one way we're working on it is through our employee performance cycle. So we have our core values and they're linked to behaviors that we share with staff. And so during one-to-one, we're asking managers to talk about these behaviors, right? And give feedback on these behaviors. And I think the next big step we're going to work on is how do we create a culture of peer accountability? Because that's when the microaggressions happen or any ism happen. That's the spaces where things that can be harmful occur. And so and I don't have an answer. So if anyone has an answer to this, how have they figured it out? Please share. But we're trying to figure out how do we have more so peer-to-peer accountability versus just manager and employee accountability, because I think that's where we're going to be more impactful.
So I think when we do our accountability, we kind of ingrain it, number one, from our strategic plan. We're accountable to that. And so we create create goals based on that. So we do tend to have DEI in our leadership goals as well. And then employee goals are kind of built upon that as well, where then it's not only creating goals and objectives, so the actions that you need to get to those goals, but also creating where you're addressing the behavior, right? You know of this behavior going into the workplace, we address it. Like we constantly talk about how we want our garden to be a safe space. And then when it doesn't become a safe space for people, then we have work to do. And that's how we need to address the behavior and address, like I said before, maybe this isn't an organization for you. So sometimes you have to get people on up out of there to hold yourself an organization, because are you really invested in this work? And when you have a statement like how we have a D&I commitment, you're saying you're committed to this work. What does that mean? And so usually that statement really holds organizations accountable, because we have this on our website. We have it under our mission statement. Do we believe what we're saying, or are we just being performative? And that's a deeper conversation. So that's how we are holding ourselves accountable as an organization. We kind of go back to our words that we have, and then we also really incorporate it in our leadership goals and our staff goals as well.
Just one other thing to add to that is also having a space in which they can let you know that information confidentially. So of course we're not all going to see all those, like I think Elkin was talking about the microaggressions that may be happening in the lunchroom or here and there, but creating a space that people feel comfortable to let you know about what's happening, that was really important for me to do, as I was a new person and nobody really knew me. So it was like, how do I make a space where they feel comfortable to even tell me something that is going on in their department or something they heard or a situation. And so I did a lot of that kind of groundwork to create a space for that. And then I became inundated with the information. So be careful what you ask for. And then that's where I connected closely with HR, and we worked on ways in which to address each one of those specifically with whatever the case may be. But yeah, I made a space, and they were very, very happy to share. Very happy to share. So
that's great to hear, Corinne. And I think that this is something that we need to acknowledge, right? And we've talked about this, is that importance of creating this space. But I think it's also creating it in different ways. You mentioned surveys. I think surveys is one way for folks that may be more comfortable in that way. Others, it's face-to-face interaction. But I think there's also an important point that you made, Corinne, is involving HR. Because I think sometimes that line of safety, there are legal requirements, right, that we are beholden to from as an institution, as a business. So some things really do need the support of people who really understand the laws that are there to support employee safety, right? And that includes, our sense of physical safety, but also emotional safety. So I think that that's an important thing. So engaging your HR, if you have that, in those conversations and coming up with an approach to try to get feedback, I think is important. So there's a question about a decentralized approach. So I was going to share that. I know we've got about 5 more minutes here, and I think it's going to actually pull in a lot of what Corinne and Kavina and Elkin talked about. So Denver Botanic Garden started this journey over a decade ago, but it started with the board and diversifying the board. And it was very intentional at that point that this becomes something embedded throughout the entire organization. So it was very intentional from a leadership perspective. And how do we do that? And so from, the leadership perspective, from Brian, anytime we have new hires that come into, or there's an orientation, but that goes the same thing with docent and volunteers, he talks about culture. But he also talks about the importance that who owns culture. It's not just the senior leadership team, right? It's all of us. Do we bring in when we cross the threshold in this organization and we start working with one another and we work with guests, like what are we bringing that day? Are we going to bring all the negativity, or are we going to kind of leave some of those things, behind? I know it's hard, but having that awareness that you might be affecting the culture. So are you, complaining or gossiping, right, in a space? So what are you contributing to that culture in your own behaviors? So we talk about that. The other thing is that it is built into our values. Our values are relevance, transformation, diversity, and sustainability. That comes across every department. So our strategic plan is divided. Whatever our strategic goals are, we bring in these values throughout it. and we bring IDEA through each of the different components of our strategic plan. So it's intentionally embedded throughout our strategic planning and goals. And then there's an departmental accountability. So what is each department doing? So based on our strategic goals and initiatives, what are each department head? How are they, developing and understanding what does IDEA mean to them? So that whether that's conservation, education, membership, visitors, volunteers, right? Marketing and social responsibility, finance, it's throughout everything. Then we also have it in our performance review. So we have a new performance review that came out last year, and it includes IDEA. What is it that you're doing? How are the ways that you're expanding your knowledge and your awareness? So we embed it through our performance reviews. I think those are just kind of some of the ways. Oh, the last thing I wanted to bring up is, we've been talking about creating an IDEA annual report. So one of the things when you have an organization that has so many things going on is sometimes we don't necessarily always see what's happening across all of our different departments. So how do we elevate the story, celebrate the successes? Because I think that is what counteracts, to your point, Elkin, some of that heaviness and discomfort sometimes, right? Is celebrating the steps that we're doing and creating visibility. And what's really interesting is recently an article was shared through AAM, and I put that in the chat. It's actually using an annual DEI report as a tool for transparency. It's a tool for accountability. It's a tool for change. So we've talked about doing two, one that is internally facing, and then one that we can also share as part of our, annually we submit a report and we, are able to share this externally with our board and outside to our stakeholders and constituents, donors, so forth. And that might be just a one-page snapshot. So those are kind of the ways we've decentralized the work, and I hope that helps. With that said, we've got like 2 more minutes left. Is there any final thoughts that Corinne, Kavina, or Elkin you want to share when it comes to measuring success or words of encouragement? I feel like folks always
the only thing I'd want to say is that it's not cookie cutter, and recognize that, your organization is going to find its best way to measure what it is you're doing. So really don't, we gave you examples, but it's going to really be customized to your organization.
And I will say that this work is tough work. You're going to have mishaps. You're going to have hiccups. You're going to make mistakes. Like, no organization is perfect. And I constantly say that to my organization. We are not a perfect organization, but we are working to do better. And so that's just what you have to really center in your work. You're trying to do better as an organization. So be aware of that, and then be aware of that it's going to take, it takes work. This work is not easy. I don't want you to think it is. It's not. And it's not on one person. Like, we all have roles in our organization. However, there are other departments that I definitely work with that help me with this work. So thank you all down on the call. It's not just me doing this work. I really do this work with my entire organization.
Yeah, I think find your tribe and love them hard. Like, find your DEI tribe. So a mentor told me many years ago that when you're doing this work, because it's so hard, that you want to be in community with people who are doing this work. So you can glean from them, get support. So when crazy things happen, you have someone to vent and hopefully point you in the right direction. So find your DEIA tribe and love them hard.
Oh, wonderfully said. I think there's something to this, which is do the work, act, right? Take action, learn, but keep going. We have to keep going. Thank you all. Although there was also a question out here, a couple saying, can they reach out to you? And I think if you wouldn't mind sharing your contact information, if you're okay with that in the chat, that would be fantastic. I think that there's a lot of really incredible information that you shared here today. Thank you so much for your time, your passion, your commitment to this work, and for being here for everyone. Again, I will share resources through the APGA IDEA Forum with additional resources that are shared from our wonderful speakers and others that I have as well. Everyone, thank you, be well, and take care of yourself. Yeah. Bye, everyone.